Today we're testing Baldur's Gate 3 on the OLED Steam Deck. You know the drill, we're gonna go through all the settings. Low, medium, high, ultra, and a bonus feature at the end, playing on the Pixel Fold at maximum full out everything using GeForce NOW. And then we'll test out a few different variants maybe of the resolution and frame rates as well. We're gonna kick things off nice and easy, low settings, FSR 2.2, balanced 800p, and just lock it in at 90 hertz, though that's probably wishful thinking. But let's jump in and check it out. Getting things started, we are definitely inside somewhere, so this is gonna be best case scenario, but that's not bad. We're chilling at the high 70 frames per second. It's even dancing up there in the 80 frames per second. But now it's kind of fluctuating, man, dipping all the way into the 50s, all the way up to the 80s. So again, we're inside right now. This is not the kind of experience that you should think you're gonna get everywhere. And yeah, right when we get outside, now we're fluctuating. It dipped all the way into the 40s, 50s, 60s. This is not bad though. Honestly, this is performing pretty well. But I think we're kind of leveling out now that we're running around outside at that high 40s to 50 frames per second. This is looking pretty good, honestly. So now we're gonna jump in, change things to medium settings, but everything else is the same. FSR 2.2, balanced, 800p, 90. Just gonna double check all these settings, make sure everything looks right. Hit that medium, and then we're gonna jump back in the game and see how this is working. As always, we gotta let it kind of load up everything, make sure that it is prime time. But at medium settings, oh, this is not great. I was gonna say, cool, we're hitting above 30, but right here in this pathway, it seems to be struggling a lot to play. But we are not even hitting 30 frames per second in there. But then see, it jumps all the way to 48 frames per second. It's kind of all over the place in this game. I wouldn't say that this is unplayable at that. It just seemed to be kind of struggling for a minute there in the below 30s. But now we're getting a pretty consistent above 40 frames per second. Kind of makes it difficult to understand like what settings, because it's so dependent on where you are in the game. But definitely when you get inside places, you can crank the settings up for sure. Like we're at 80 frames per second now. We're outside, a few times it was under 30. But now we're gonna jump into high settings, keeping all those other things at the same. FSR 2.2, balanced, 800p. This, again, we should be able to see some good performance when we're inside places, but it's gonna be more telling when we're outside in the open world. But yeah, high settings, inside, 70, mid 60s, like still getting above 60 frames per second, high settings. And FSR is set to balance.
As if that were enough to keep me out.
But this makes it's almost like I wish there could be two settings in a game where it would like auto switch. If you walked inside somewhere, it would just automatically change to your settings. Like I could be like, I want high FSR 2.2 balance when I'm inside, but then when I go outside, see we're currently above 30, but let's see if it can stay at 30. But how sick would it be if it just changed to low settings outside, just automatically? That'd be a cool feature. But like, not so bad, but here, this part again, just like struggle bus. I think most places it's gonna hit above 30 frames per second, but if you're looking for the best way to enjoy all your games, the Viture PRO XR glasses are the way to go. 1080p, 120 hertz, super bright, and if you buy them, use my code Joshua Gray, and you'll get 10% off all the accessories, and I get a kickback, which helps me make more of these types of videos. Now back to the game, back to the settings. We're gonna go crazy. We're gonna jump things up to ultra. Sticking with that balanced FSR 2.2, 800p, 90 hertz. Not that we're going to get anywhere close to 90 frames per second. But look at that. This is the hardest spot to play in this little area. And we're getting mid-20s, and then it's jumping here, now that we're to an easier place, low 30s. I was not expecting this to handle it this well. Obviously, I don't think anyone's going to be playing outside at Ultra, but inside, it's crazy. Like, it's just so much easier to run this game when you're inside compared to outside. Like, this is definitely playable. Way over 60 frames per second. Kind of chilling in the 70s. But that means if you're inside somewhere and you know you're going to be there a long time, you could switch over to ultra settings on the OLED Steam Deck and enjoy this tasty, beautiful looking game. That's not too bad. Pretty impressed. Outside, not so much. So let's change FSR to performance and see if we could maybe help it out when we're outside in the open world. We're still at that low 30 frames per second, but kind of mid. Just touch that 40 frames per second. So potentially switching over to FSR performance could kind of be the saving grace if you really want that ultra settings. However, I would say FSR on performance just degrades the quality so much. I would much rather play at medium or even low and have FSR set to quality or balanced. But, you know, to each their own. Now I want to see if it helps it out if we frame limit to 30 frames per second. Maybe that will give it a little bit more oomph to be able to maintain the 30 frames per second. We got to kind of run around, give it a minute to figure out its life. But currently, we're seeing the opposite. We're running through this part again. It's just really hating this spot of the game, but we're not getting 30 frames per second at all. We're chilling at the mid-20s. But if you do the top-down view, it seems to have a better time running it. So now we're seeing a pretty consistent 30 frames per second. I don't know if anybody likes playing it that way, but if you don't mind it that way, that could be kind of a little trick there, where if you want to be at higher settings, just go to that top-down view, because it just performs a lot better. Now we're going to go back to high settings, but we're going to stay at the FSR performance mode, and we're still locked in at that 30 hertz, just to see what we can do here outside in the world. But even at high settings, performance, locked at 30 hertz on the Steam Deck, it's still not able to maintain that. This is when, like, FSR 3 would just annihilate this. We'd probably be sitting pretty, and it would have no problems with this. Again, this would only be sometimes in the game when you're in demanding areas where it's hard to run, that it wouldn't be able to maintain it. But see, like now it's 30 frames per second, 29. But if you weren't looking at the frames per second counter, you wouldn't even be seeing those things. Just food for thought. But now let's switch it down to medium and see if we can actually get 30 frames per second. Because medium FSR 2.2 at performance, 800p, locked at 30 frames per second. Like, I really hope it does this. And I don't want to speak too soon, but it looks like this is where you could get that locked at 30, you know, medium settings outside in a bit of a demanding area before everyone freaks out and I'm not in like the third act or whatever where it's really terrible. I'm just not there in the game, so I can't test that. So it can get worse than this, but medium performance locked at 30 seems to be working. Let's jump to 45. Maybe medium from high is such a big jump that we could get 40, 45 frames per second, and we're not seeing that. But it is doing a pretty good job of keeping us at that 30 frames per second. And then when you get into a less demanding area, it'll probably jump to 45, like right there. And even this, there's like a lot going on. So if you were inside, obviously, no problem, 45 frames per second. But yeah, this is keeping it above the 30, and you could have it at 45. So in other areas, it's a little bit smoothed out and nicer experience. But, you know, overall, I'm not a huge fan of FSR. Once you get to performance, the quality just isn't there. So I'm not sure that I would play it like this, but it's interesting. So enough of the frame limits. We're going to jump that back just to 90 hertz maxed out and kind of run around. And now it's playing like 50s. That's very interesting. We didn't change any settings. We're still medium performance, 800p, but now we're not frame limiting. And now it's staying above 45 and into the 50s. This isn't like a super scientific, test. We're just doing some real world running around, seeing how things run and function. So it's hard to tell if maybe this is just an easier angle for it to load it out and to play. Because now, man, this is not bad. Other than, again, we're set to FSR performance. So take it with a grain of salt. It's good to have, like, the option, but I don't know. If we kick things to low settings at this FSR performance, 900p, 90 hertz, the hope would be that we're getting over 60 frames per second, because we're taking a pretty big hit to the quality of the game. But unfortunately, we're kind of chilling at the 50s. Mind you, mid 50s, so that's not terrible. Okay, now it's dipping into the mid 40s. It makes me just wonder if this game in a year or so, if the developers are gonna make it a little more optimized, because the frame rates are jumping like 20 frames per second. You know, just the 20s to 60s all over the place. And it's interesting that the overhead, which shows so much more of the game, plays better, but it's like more optimized. Inside is going to be, obvious, no problems whatsoever. Yeah, we're getting like 70 frames per second. Just for fun, because it defaults to FSR 1, I'm going to change to FSR 1 balanced. But oh my gosh. Guys, FSR 1 compared to FSR 2.2 is insane. Balanced FSR 1 looks like garbage. And the performance isn't great either. This is strictly just to look at it. But I find it interesting that it defaults to FSR 1. So you're definitely going to want to go into your settings and make sure that you switch to FSR 2.2. Because this is atrocious. They should not be defaulting to the old FSR 1. The performance isn't good. It doesn't look good. That's terrible. All right, back to FSR 2.2. Thank you very much. Low settings, but we're going to bump down to 720p and see if maybe that could give us outside 60 frames per second experience. Starting things off in the mid 40s, jumping into the 50s. Not what I was hoping for, but not bad. Maybe. Mid 50s kind of seems what? Low 50s, high 40s. Interesting. I'm not sure it's worth switching to 720p, for this. But now we know, right? Now we know. Okay, this is the area that it doesn't like, but it seems to be doing okay. Dipping into the high 40s, low 50s. I mean, the fact that we're playing these types of games on a handheld device. I mean, come on. That's ridiculous. What's more ridiculous is playing it on my Pixel Fold at all ultra maxed out ray tracing everything at 120 hertz. And this is possible because of GeForce NOW. GeForce NOW is so underrated, guys. It is so much fun to be able to play this game and all my games that are on GeForce NOW at just like full maxed out settings on any of my devices. I could be playing this on the Steam Deck, my computer, my phone, all the different things. But I found it really enjoyable playing these games on my Pixel Fold because the Android app allows 120 hertz, and this GameSir X2 Bluetooth controller, it's just a nice little pair. And look at this. This is just over Wi-Fi. 120 frames per second, no problem, just maxed out. Everything maxed out. So if you want a super portable experience and the best graphics possible, you can always just jump onto GeForce NOW. They have a free tier and the paid one. The paid one has a better graphics card, so you get this type of experience, but the free version is still fantastic. I highly recommend, and I'm a huge advocate for GeForce NOW. I've been using it for, 2 years, maybe. And I did not anticipate how far they've come with streaming, especially with GeForce NOW. The codecs and everything, it looks so clean and crisp and good. I could go on about that, but it doesn't matter, because look at this. Look at this gameplay. Staying above 100 frames per second at all maxed out. There is just nothing. This just looks so good. And this is my phone. I could just pop this out of my pocket and play this. If you didn't want the controller, like say you were somewhere else, you can just use their overlay on the screen and play games like this, no problem. But it's definitely more comfortable to have a controller, obviously. Make sure you subscribe, hit that thumbs up, leave me a comment. What games do you want to see tested on what devices? Let's go, guys. We're over 5,000 subscribers, marching our way to that 10,000 subscriber mark. That's all I got for you today. Later!